Hello, friends and neighbors. This is Professor Hamamoto. It is October 13, year 2022, and it is 3 p.m. Pacific Daylight Time, 6 o'clock Eastern Time. And I say that because we have a very special guest. You can tell I'm much more excited than usual, but we have a guest who is with us from the East Coast, who I'll be bringing in a moment. In a moment, it's a conversation with Mr. Anton Chaitkin. And many of you know people here who are regular viewers, subscribers to this channel, and of course, long term subscribers to Executive Intelligence Review, or somehow been following the work of Anton Chaitkin. I know I have, and I'll get to that in a moment. But his contributions are known to millions of Americans and people all around the English speaking world. How do I know that? Because I read books that cite him over and over again, and I'll show you some of the cover art just from my own small personal library, and many more articles cite his work as being instrumental to their own investigations, respective investigations of authors that we know and love, people like Jim Marrs, all the way to people like David Icke, right? So you might not be familiar with his name if you're newer to this form of inquiry, but you have been influenced by his work in some way. In other words, the decades, the years of provocative published work that has been executed, has been delivered by Mr. Chaikin, has become part of our intellectual DNA, if you will. And that's not just people in research, but you see his influence amongst general interest writers, I would argue, critics, social critics, political critics, even though they might not admit it, researchers, of course, pop musicians, right? Because his scope is pretty wide, Mr. Chaikin here, and even film directors. A lot of Netflix stuff integrates some of these ideas, even though they do not want to credit him. And of course, in academia, that's the death sentence if you ever want to recognize his contributions. So I'm just trying to, some of you or most of you might already know this, but I just want to reiterate the incredible impact that he has had on American and intellectual life in general, and the English speaking world in particular, of Mr. Anton Chaitkin. So, with that, let me bring on Mr. Chaitkin himself. He's been very busy lately. How are you, Mr. Chaitkin? Welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you, Professor. Well, it's really nice to finally get to talk to you.
It's incredible. I listened to your great interview just yesterday with my friend and colleague, John O'Loughlin. And I just want to tell the viewers here that we're going to range into some really current issues, including the possibility of a nuclear exchange with the warring parties. Right? It's a issue of interest to all of us. Me in particular, who has spent a Fulbright year at the University of Hiroshima and has been very much interested in issues of not only nuclear war but nuclear energy. And then I'm going to put in couple of wild cards here, if Mr. Chaitkin does not mind. But I want to talk a little bit about the looming bioeconomy that I'm reading about. I'm getting a lot of chatter here in my part of the world about a completely new reorganization of human life that they're calling biopolitics. The critics are calling biopolitics. And I also want to talk about some of these black swan psyops that periodically throw us off the trajectory of building the American Republic, such as the talk I gave on Tuesday with the death of the Associate Justice Antonin Scalia in 2016, but also political assassinations with Mr. Chaikin. He's written extensively about that. Bio outbreaks. I'm not going to get any more specific than that. And of course, terrorism, which he's, again, written about extensively. I'm sorry for hogging the first few minutes here, but let me, just to establish amongst people who are new to your work, demonstrate, not just by my words, but graphically, why I'm such a fanboy of your work, beginning with Treason in America, and of course, Who We Are. And I'm looking forward to the next volumes. So here we go. Just bear with me for 59 seconds because I
Sure.
think this is intended also to be an homage to Mr. Chaikin in real time. Okay. That was the idea. Here's the book that turned me on. I'm sorry, I might be going too quickly. Here's the book with the co-writer Webster Tarpley, the first critical book that came out that I was aware of on George Bush, and it's huge. And this is still required reading, even though these principal characters off the historical stage, their influence is still looming very large. Of course, this is the recent book, or the current book. And Jim Mars, many of you know him. He cites Anton Chaitkin. And again, as we were talking before the show, Mr. Chaitkin might not appreciate being cited by certain people, but nonetheless, his intellectual influence is felt by many diverse writers, Jim Mars being one of them. This is the book by, I think, which is a Jim Keith, as I recall. Yeah, because Mr. Chaikin has written extensively long before the Tubu people came on, the new crop of newly anointed experts in this. Mr. Chaikin was writing about this autobiographically. This is a classic in issues of quote unquote mind. Even someone like Annie Jacobson is writing about mind control and MK Ultra. It's part of our common storehouse of knowledge. This is a Canadian writer, David Livingston, John Eric Phelps, Vatican Assassins, third edition. These are just books from my own personal collection. It's even in an encyclopedia. It's a reference. His book is a reference source, according to the Encyclopedia of the Central Intelligence Agency. Secret societies, of course. Been there, done that, right? Conjuring Hitler. This is a really incredible book that I never knew about. Another, let's see, who is this?
Piper.
This is an author, very interesting. Michael Collins Piper, who died under suspicious circumstances not too long ago. Transhumanism. I think this is another David Livingston book. New Underworld Order. So this is, like I say, just from my library alone, and it gives you an idea of the breadth, the scope, and the depth of the work of Mr. Chaitkin. So, Mr. Chaikin, let me shut up for now and let you have the floor. I just wanted to gush a little bit about your incredible contributions over the many, many decades. But first of all, I needed some, if you don't mind, give us a little bit of autobiographical information. Can you take us like three generations back of the Chaitkin family line and both paternal and maternal?
I don't know much about beyond my father on his side. He was uh, from living in what was called Latvia or Russia. He was a Jewish man, and his parents and grandparents, I don't know much about them except names. Uh, and he came to the United States. He was born in 1898. He came to the United States and became a lawyer and a really humane person, and did some outstanding things to fight both Wall Street and Hitler in the 1930s.
Mhm.
Uh, my my mother was born in Brooklyn. She was a fourth generation Brooklyn person. I think she told me once that her great grandmother was the first divorcee in Brooklyn. But she has more to her credit than that. She's a
Wow, that is scandalous for those times, right? But yeah, I should say that the Chaikin family
Jew.
line, the influence goes back to Jacob Chaitkin. Are we frozen up here? Uh-oh. Are you there? Let me bring you back in here. Okay. I think we've frozen up here. I'm having some latency problems on my end. But until we get Mr. Chaitkin back online here, uh, oh, there you are. Okay, you back? Uh, I'll remove him from the studio and please buzz back in. I'll re-invite you. Hang on a moment, ladies and gentlemen. We're having some problems before this. It's no conspiracy. There are some latency problems with my computer. Okay, let me continue then until we get him back online. But the source I have is that his father, who he was referring to, Mr. Chaikin, Mr. Anton Chaitkin, his name was Jacob, who was a Latvian immigrant. And there's a very long entry from a book called Matrix 3. It's by a guy named Valdemar Valerian, which I'll be glad to share with people who are on my Patreon. And it's called The Psychosocial, Chemical, Biological, and Electromagnetic Manipulation of Human Consciousness. Let's see. Okay, sorry about that. I thought that was Mr. Chaikin. And just to continue here, it says that Jacob Chaikin, the father, he was an attorney, he was an immigrant to the U.S., was hired by the American Jewish Congress as the legal director to boycott Nazi Germany. The latency problem for me has gone away, but unfortunately, so is Mr. Chaikin. Hopefully, we can get him back in a moment. And it gives his whole, not his entire background. I think Mr. Jacob Chaitkin, that's why I asked about his family background, deserves a good deal of biographical investigation himself. Okay, he's back.
Cell phone, but I want to get back on the.
Oh, here we're back. We're back.
It doesn't look okay.
We can hear you and we can see you, but thank you for doing this. In the meantime, I was giving a homage to your dear father, Jacob Chaitkin. And I don't know if you realize this, but there's a huge, long entry of him about his own political activism. And my gosh, he's a highly accomplished gentleman in his own right. So the fruit doesn't fall very far from the tree, does it? What about your mother, though? She sounds like she's from a long line of very freedom-loving women and family.
Yeah, after my father died, she was working at Caltech and in a campus agency that brought in guests, and they brought in celebrities or people of ideas from around the world. But she plunged into uh, working in a with the American Friends Service Committee and working for peace and for uh, wiping out poverty.
Mhm,
Uh, in her last years, and it's
mhm.
reflected her. She was really an accomplished intellectual in her growing up. They met
And
during World War II.
and
Uh,
your mother's name and her maiden name, please?
there's Janet Rosenbaum.
Janet Rosenbaum. So she moved to Pasadena, like you say, Caltech?
Well, I was born in Brooklyn, and at the age of uh, well, as a baby, not quite sure about when the move was, but we moved from the East Coast to California, then down to Southern California when I was a child. I grew up in
So you are a
Pasadena.
Southern California
Right.
semi-native like me.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
And this is in Pasadena, occult Pasadena?
Well, I didn't know about all those things about Pasadena until I started studying history later
Uh,
on.
Uh-huh.
I know that I went to high school there, and I had never even heard that Jackie Robinson was a student in one of the high schools there, because
That
it
was
was
Pasadena High School, right?
no, it was the other one, John Muir. But
John Muir, yeah.
I went to Pasadena High School, and they it was a segregated system until they had to be, you know, made to desegregate it.
Hmm.
Uh, anyway, uh, I found out about my father much later on in life. About he
Hmm.
died when I was 12, uh,
Oh,
but he was a tremendous influence on me up to that time, up to the time that he passed away. And I've got, been able to look through some of his work and his letters, and it reflects uh, a passion in his generation, a lot of the times from immigrants like himself, but a passion for justice in the world, uh, and a sense of humor that was terrific and very important. Uh, he was in favor of a decent, friendly relationship between the United States and Russia, at that time the Soviet Union,
hmm.
and he was very knowledgeable about the Soviet government and so forth, but critical of them. And uh, he had a subscription to the Soviet Encyclopedia. They would send him um, um, world what do you call it, yearbooks each year from
Yeah.
from Moscow. And he showed me, when I was about 10 years old, that they had sent out a notice with one of their books asking the subscribers overseas to tear out an entry from a previous yearbook and paste over it the new party line about somebody. And he said, see how ridiculous these people are. They're totally unrealistic, that they think they could influence people in a foreign country to do something so arbitrary as that, based on their petty politics or dangerous politics. But he wanted to have this it was crucial, and this is FDR's point of view. My father shared that you have to have the friendship of the greatest, most powerful countries. Uh, Otherwise, you have no civilization. So
Agreed. And we need friends more than ever. And we're going to conclude our conversation with hopefully your insights into the looming, well, the conflict is already in play, but it could get very, very ugly soon. But toward that end, I'm alluding to Russia, of course, but toward that end, I know a lot of, which is really uncharacteristic of even a lot of independent journalists, is that, but early on, you were very much talking about the Asian part of the world, including, writing extensively about, because I found one of your older essays writing extensively about this man who most Americans don't even know. They wouldn't recognize him.
Sun Yat-sen was the first president of the Independent Republic of China early in the 20th century, and he was he continued in 1911 and beyond the point of view that America under Teddy Roosevelt and others had abandoned, the, the,
Mhm.
the outlook of Lincoln, to build great railroads, to uplift civilization, to challenge the errors and stupidity of a ruling oligarchy, of imperial oligarchs. America was the center of that before Teddy Roosevelt, and so that's something that we have to understand. But Sun Yat-sen had behind him some Americans who were not in necessarily in good with our government at that time. There, some army people in Southern California put together a a, uh, a group of trainers and supporters to build up a cadre force for his military that took power then in a peaceful coup against the Chinese emperor in 1911.
Now, is that the
Uh,
one that was to be led by Homer Lee or
yeah,
Lay?
that's right, Homer
Okay.
Lee. Wow.
Who was
So
backed, by the way, by the Chandler, Colonel Chandler of the LA Times?
maybe I think
Well,
that
this
there's
is
a
according to a recent biography on Otis
yeah.
Chandler. Yeah.
There that may be so, but there's deeper influences at work here, and you have to go
Mhm.
back to the to Lincoln sending Anson Burlingame and General President Grant sending other Americans to Japan. Anson Burlingame went as the ambassador to China from
Mhm.
Lincoln, and both the Lincoln and Grant administrations, at their best, were directly countering the imperial attacks against East Asia. Uh,
Yeah.
and Burlingame and the people coming under Grant were seeking an alliance between Japan and China, and to bring Russia into the picture in East Asia as an ally of the United States.
Wow.
This is a
This is so
completely
important to remember
yeah.
today.
This is a completely different idea. The for example, the Russian Trans-Siberian Railway being built in the 1890s, up to the death of McKinley, of the assassination. That railway was built almost entirely with American materials. Thousands of American workers were producing the steel and the rails and so forth.
Mhm.
And we were seeking to make the Pacific Ocean a, a vast zone of peace, and especially to raise the power of both China and Japan, as well
Mhm.
as Russia,
Yes.
to have modern scientific capabilities, and to be able to increase their populations, and to be equal powers in the world, and to not to destroy Britain or France or some of these imperial countries, but to override and put down the imperial system. Today, that imperial system is what we call globalism, and it's based on the doctrine of free trade or cheap labor, and it must be understood that the United States was the center of opposition to that imperial system. That's how we became ourselves a great power. That's what I'm bringing out in the work that I'm doing now. And as far as the danger of war between the United States, Russia, and of course China, the danger comes from the United States having abandoned that civilized point of view. That's what is civilization. It is the deliberate raising of the standard of living and intelligence of the common people of your country. That is civilization. And also, it's
Mhm.
based on generosity. When with Lincoln or FDR or Kennedy, for example, we were powerfully building up our own industries, our own science, under their programs, and at the same time with an outreach to help other countries rise alongside of us. That's the
Mhm.
only safe system. You have to have a multipolar world.
And that
Well,
was through missionary work that was ironically
sometimes
being executed by places that are like the source of today's problem, places like Yale University,
they,
right? They were sending missionaries overseas.
there was a missionary group. Now, who are you showing on the screen here? This
This is
is.
Young Wing
Oh
of
yeah, Wing.
Yale
I know.
University.
Yes.
You know
Well,
him.
that's yes, and he did part of the part of the outreach that related to the Burlingame mission. But
Yes.
there was a group that was based in Massachusetts, the American Board of Commissioners for Foreign Missions, and I wrote a play about one of these guys, Dan Bradley, who went to Thailand. Was a
Right, right,
was a friend of the King of Siam, uh, and he put America on the side of that king against the British opium racket, and
right,
the king was a brilliant student of religion, a reformer of Buddhism, and an astronomer, and he is misportrayed by a slander written against him by the British spy that he fired as the tutor of his children. Was this a lady who then wrote memoirs that were turned into the false book, false story, The King and I. The real
right. With
story
Yul
is this.
Brynner.
Yeah, well, I like the songs, but the story
Oh,
is wrong.
sure. Yeah, it was a Broadway hit,
Yeah, that's right. But
but it's a misrepresentation of the history. Yeah.
the missionary Dan Beach Bradley, is very well known in Thailand, Siam, not well known here, but he and the king used to sit up at night and have real strong debates about religion, about which religion was ridiculous or superstitious, and but they were deep friends, and they wanted to give to all, mankind and to their own people a sense of the infinite power that is available to mankind that connects you to the spiritual. And the king, with Bradley's help, brought in steam engines and so forth. He was on the King Rama the Fourth was on um, an expedition into the jungle to uh, to see an eclipse of the sun, which he forecast better than any European at that time. And his precision at that forecast astonished his people. He died of jungle fever there, and on his deathbed, he said, "Now do you believe in the power of science? That this kind of uh, uh, scientific inquiry belongs to everyone and is the heritage of all mankind, of all races, and so forth." This is the same idea that Frederick Douglass had, that the freemen after the Civil War had to have access to universal knowledge, not just trades. They had to
Hmm.
they had to have access to classical music and to the
Hmm.
cultures and achievements of Europe and of the rest of the world.
Which
That's
includes
all.
the Asian world. Yeah,
That's right.
because Ulysses S. Grant, after he was done being president, went to Japan. He toured that whole area because he
That's right.
shared that vision that you are reminding us of today, Mr. Chaitkin.
Yeah. So
This is
Japan,
Ulysses S. Grant,
yeah, Japan's
one of the greatest Americans.
rise to power was a project of a culture that was clearly inventive for centuries going back, and nevertheless was uh, isolated because of the threat of the European imperialists. That same thing happened to China. They abandoned outreach. China used to be a very vigorous nation of outreach. So they were
Namely,
isolated. The United
if
States.
I'm if
Go ahead.
if I may interject,
Yeah, sure.
namely the Society of Jesus.
Yes. Well,
That's why Japan supposedly went into Sakoku, closed off, right, until the Freemasonic opening through Admiral Perry. But they knew what the Society of Jesus has done to China and other parts of Southeast Asia, and say we're not going to have that here.
well, there's a deeper story even there.
Okay.
Leibniz was vastly interested in the East and the culture of China, and he had friends who were Jesuits. And the issue in all of these things is the use of the church or some agency like the Jesuits, but the use of the church more generally by oligarch families and powers, and bankers, and such like that, using people to destroy cultures and to take advantage of people. But Leibniz worked through some of his Jesuit friends to do some things in the opposite direction to connect, to try to restore the ancient collaboration between the leadership of civilization in Asia and the new rise of it in Europe. Uh,
Mhm.
so all of this history depends on having some sense, which has been lost in America, of the idea of the excitement about progress, the excitement about invention, the excitement about inquiry that
Mhm.
has led to all of the progress of our country. Um, so my work uh, has recast the story of America's power, the rise of American power, to show the who did this, who was responsible for this, why were they, and who were they to challenge the imperial system and outflank it and to build up the power to do good. That's the history here. That was the history in Japan. Japan was taken off that course in the late 19th century by a new philosophy, even worse imperial philosophy, put together by King Edward VII with the help of President Theodore Roosevelt. They were partners, and
Mhm.
they were the ones that led the way to the Pearl Harbor attack, to the German attack on Russia, to World War One. They reorganized the world against the earlier American influence, which was to help other countries who were talented to rise quickly to become powers. Japan rose faster than any other country, I think, in history. Germany was rising at the same time with American encouragement. So this is a history that is different than simply considering the crimes and the shortcomings of the United States. Historically, those crimes and shortcomings have to be understood in this fight between two sides in our history, the imperial versus the patriotic and progressive nationalists who wanted to help other countries do the same. Those two sides have always fought it out. The financiers from London and New York, uh, and the slave owners as a combination against the national development of the United States. And you have feudalistic influences in other countries, in Japan or in Russia, for example. But those influences from a feudal faction were promoted from the outside by particularly British intelligence and British power of various kinds. So it's the question of fostering one direction or another of native talent. And originally, America's rise was aided by humane people in England and in Europe, within England. But then England's the oligarchs decided that they wouldn't allow the USA to, or any other country to have industry or to have science. So they cut off this more humane background of Western ideas. Right
Can
now,
I ask you? Can I ask
sure,
you a question, Mr.
yeah.
Chaitkin? Because I don't really see much mention of it in your work. But to what extent that cutoff point? To what degree can it be attributed to the expulsion of the Huguenot from Catholic France over into Switzerland, which, as you know, is an international banking center? And with their notion of Calvinistic predestination. What about the Huguenot diaspora, if you will, because they're rarely addressed in these global and even national histories. It's always the Freemasons or the Illuminati, but the Huguenot diaspora, I think it's historiographic oversight of huge proportions.
That's a really good inquiry. Very, very important, because there's two sides there. Huguenots, the Protestants in Western Europe, or even in Eastern Europe, were very talented people. And King Louis XIV was influenced by very, very evil nobility, the Fronde, to go against the Protestants and to make war on Holland. And the best French leaders like Colbert were totally opposed to these warlike and discriminatory things. So many of these Huguenots, these expelled Protestants, came to America and did good here and went to other countries. But there was also a center for Protestant banking in Geneva and in Amsterdam and in London. Amsterdam, Geneva, and London were three centers that shared a common purpose among the Calvinists and also the British Imperial interests, and that point of view, that shared point of view, was a deeply cruel, anti-human idea that all law, in not only a human law but the laws of the universe, are based on naked power that has nothing to do with the rise of human powers. That human beings are cannot be aided by sympathy. This is the imperial doctrine that part of that was using Calvinism, but this is the imperial doctrine of the Anglo-Dutch system in Geneva with these Protestants. Actually, is a very old center for usury and this kind of banking, but the Anglo-Dutch system is still what we have now today. That's globalism. That's
Hmm.
imperialism. That's the worst aspects. That's where the fascist ideas came from. That's also where a lot of the false flag, if you want to say that, terrorism and leftism comes from. It was these Geneva people, led by Jeremy Bentham and others out of London, that made anarchism the center of the French Revolution, that destroyed that revolution. So
Mhm.
this is it's the same dichotomy that you have in our country. It's the two sides that you see within these Protestants, and we that's something that needs to. You have that in Holland, of course, which was one of the worst
Mhm.
colonial powers in Asia,
Yeah.
the cruelest. Uh,
Including they tried to get into Japan, as I mentioned before,
that's right.
but they were embargoed to Deshima and Nagasaki because the shogunal spies knew what was going on in the neighboring countries of the Dutch East Asia Company.
But
So yeah,
that itself
what you're talking,
is a
the Dutch
betrayal.
masters, the cigars, where did their
Yes.
wealth come from? It was coming from Indonesia and all those whole areas, that region.
Well, that's one way to look at it, but the real wealth of Holland came from the humane science and powerful breakthroughs
Mhm.
of invention. So these two sides of Europeans' experience are fighting it out.
Right.
The idea of the nation state, the republic that is for the benefit of the people living there, and to raise their powers, to make them more skilled, and to be more demanding of a part in ruling self-government. That idea came to be forbidden by these old families that are left over from really pre-civilized Europe. And all of the greatness of the West and the power of the West is something that these old families and this old idea of that nobody should interfere with the power of the warlords. They're fighting it out. The power of the West doesn't come from stealing and looting and destroying. Those looters and destroyers could destroy other countries and could break down the civilized accomplishments in the West itself. But when you are blustering against all these other countries like NATO is doing today, that's not Western values. Western values are the Renaissance. Western values are the inventions and the discoveries. The United States today is only producing destruction in the world. All the sanctions, all of the wars, and so we have to look back to the accomplishments of our talented forebears in the West, as well as in these other countries, as well as in the places that were victimized by imperialism, and see this contest in our own background, and bring together the whole world on the basis of this idea of deliberately raising up talent in a cooperative way. That's the only way that we're going to survive.
Okay. So you see modern history riding on these two rails, and they're contradictory, right? Rails of development. One is the advancement of technology and industry and knowledge, science and the humanities. And the other is the purely predatory notion of entitlement by these hereditary bloodlines. Now, is
Yeah,
that the battle that is being waged now in Russia and Ukraine in 2022? Is that the same
it is.
playbook,
It
so to
is.
speak?
It is. If you read Putin's speeches, his recent speech about what's going on, he's the most trenchant critic of this imperial globalist system. There's nothing false about what he's saying. If he is overdoing the idea of Mother Russia, then all we have to do is to acknowledge that pursuing a war to destroy that country, which has been actually done for now several decades, it is going to put them in a corner, and they can't have any good result. What is required now is confidence building measures. That's the way we used that really senior American strategists used to understand that
Mhm.
you have to carry out very sophisticated steps. Kennedy understood this. He was the last president to do this in
Right.
a decent way.
Yeah,
You
let's
have
go to the moon, right? Yeah.
you have to go to the moon together, but you
Mhm.
also have to, like the test ban treaty, the treaty to outlaw atmospheric tests of nuclear weapons. That didn't solve everything, and he wasn't really aiming for universal disarmament or something like that. It was a very uh, practical step to move towards mutual confidence that the other side was aiming at calming things down, and that's what we have to
Confidence
do now.
building.
Yeah,
Confidence building.
yeah,
Is that what you're
confidence
saying?
building. Yes,
Mo- Morale building instead of demoralization tactics that we're seeing being perpetrated by outside globalist media interests primarily.
Yeah,
which
that's right.
includes Satanism, right? Pedophilia, all kinds of other completely corrosive, toxic forces that have been unleashed in America over the past 50 years,
Yeah, you could.
infiltrating companies like the Disney company as well. I mean, what can be more Americana than that?
I could tell you a
Yeah.
lot more Americana than Disney, but uh,
Well, let's hear the smut
no, I'm not talking about the smut.
or the
The
dirt.
problem
Let's say
the
the
problem
schmutz.
is that if you try to investigate the evildoers, and you try to get to the bottom of who's behind them. You look for organizations, and you look for histories and bloodlines, and what have you. You're missing the the power in human civilization. You're missing the basic point of the whole fight that's been going on for millennia. You're
Mhm.
completely missing it, because the power of civilization doesn't come from anything governed by these hoodlums.
Right.
That's where an oligarchy that is rooted uh, in simply money gathering
Yeah.
and culling the herd. They will promote populism, that where the populists see themselves as only underlings, not qualified to govern, and not not at all in touch with the man's history as an uplifter of science and industry and culture. Populists, the worst side of populism is its disconnection from governing for a more powerful human future.
Hmm.
And that's by the design of the oligarchy. But
I
but
understand.
it's a tricky problem, because uh, the I wrote a book, Treason in America, about the history of the Eastern establishment in the United States. And there's a premise in that which people may have not understood. And that is, there were two sides in this fight: the American patriots and nationalists, who were humane and who were talented people, were fighting all the time against this imperial faction, this
Hmm.
racist faction.
Hmm.
Uh, Now, the current work that I'm doing, and Who We Are: America's Fight for Universal Progress from Franklin to Kennedy, uh, this is taking up directly the history of our side in history. And
Hmm. Hmm.
these are the people that make self-government, powerful self-government, possible. And they're in all cultures.
Hmm.
And so there's actually a brotherhood throughout history, among the national party, the raisers of civilization in each country. There's an international link between them. There always is, because they see each other's success
Hmm.
as being beneficial to all. And
Yeah,
this is the opposite of the oligarchs.
absolutely. Well, Mr. Chaikin, if I could be honest with you, our conversation has really been valuable in my understanding of your current book, this volume here, because I'll be truthful. When I read it, I said, because I had to think about it after I had to assimilate it for a few weeks. And I said, this is kind of like an exercise in nostalgia because these days are never going to be revisited. They're gone. It is literally history. But now you're explaining your larger agenda is confidence building and morale building and revisiting the values that made Western civilization that
That's
blanketed the
right.
world. Am I
That's
correct
right.
on that? Now wait,
Yeah.
this is not nostalgia. This is the
No, this is
future.
Well, the plan for the book is I'm writing volume 2 now, which is going to go from it's basically Lincoln up through the end of the 19th century through McKinley. This is an amazing development of power for the good. And then the third volume will take it from this basically hoodlum regime of that came in by assassination, Teddy Roosevelt, through Franklin Roosevelt, his cousin, who renounced Teddy's imperialism, and then up through Kennedy, and so these are going to be the 3 volumes. So it's a recasting of America's history from a very, very optimistic point of view, and I'm hoping to be able to tackle the really difficult issues, like what happened to the American Indians, the race question, and in particular the question of the relations between the United States success and the success or potential success of other countries. This is something that is
And if I may suggest,
understood.
also the importance of Spanish America and Mexico America.
Yep. Yeah.
That incredible, which we're still fighting today in 2022, as being formative to the American Republic, good and bad, because a lot of the heroes of the Texas Republic movement were Mexicans originally, right? Mexican nationals. So, like you say, it's more complex than they did this to us and we did this for them.
In the period after the Civil War, there was a profound attempt by the best Americans who were Lincoln's friends to try to build up the American West and Mexico at the same time, and they were directly opposed by real gangsters from New England and New York and Britain.
Mhm.
There was actually an armed showdown that occurred near the in the west, in the southern part of Colorado, to try to prevent a rail line from being built from Colorado to Mexico City. Uh, and this is a confrontation over what do we see ourselves as? Are we the brothers of Mexico and their
Wait
raw
a minute.
power?
You said a railroad from Colorado to Mexico City?
Yes, the guy that was building that built up the industries and railroads of Colorado. This
Oh my
William
gosh.
J. Palmer, he's a hero, a wonderful man, a Medal of Honor winner in the Civil War, and he
Wow.
also built the National Railways of Mexico, but he was prevented from linking the two by the brutal intervention of these Northeastern financiers who hated what Lincoln was up to and wanted to have only uh, brutality and conquest be the theme in the American West. Uh, this guy Palmer, who founded Colorado Springs, had a vision of the West as a civilized place with full of farms and modern industries, not gunslingers and cattle barons and mining barons, but rather a thickly populated, irrigated, cultured place with classical culture. And uh, this was this was part of the idea of reaching out from the West Coast to Asia and South America to share the fruits of our civilization. And really, I believe that it was the failure, the deliberate suppression of that civilized development in the Mountain West and most of the West. It failed because of the attack on it by the financiers and the Anglo-American elite. Uh, Foiled Lincoln's plan, and this guy Palmer's ideas were put down. But the American Indians would have had a chance to share in the growing wealth of the United States if the West had not been put on that brutal course by the
Uh,
opponents of Lincoln. Uh, there was no way that the older way of life of the Plains Indians in particular could be preserved. But the idea that the Indians should be given the means to have a rise of in a new civilization,
mhm,
that idea was foreign to the both the Southern slave owners and the Boston and the New York financiers and the British Empire. They didn't believe in assimilating people that whose culture we wanted to change. They believed in simply conquest and wiping people out. And so there's different issues than are being raised now. It's not Columbus versus indigenous peoples.
mhm,
You have to go back to the Renaissance. And what was the idea of the Renaissance? It was one of the basic ideas in the Renaissance, and Columbus was part of that, was to have an outreach to people who were not part of the rising civilization, to have a friendly outreach to them, to have a mutual learning, and to see the spirit of God and the idea of genius in every people. That's the idea of the Renaissance. There was a contrary idea in Europe that
true.
followed Columbus, that brought black slaves in, that it really came out of Venice, not Florence. And
Well,
it was
to your point, there were emissaries from, and this is the mid 16th century, from Japan that visited the Vatican, who were astounded by this universal vision of mutual worldwide prosperity, and same from Imperial China. They were coming from all parts of
yeah,
Asia in order to share this Renaissance, the positive Renaissance vision that you just laid out for us
yeah. So
early
that
on, quite
we
early on.
we also lost this battle in the South
Yeah.
after the Civil War. Grant tried to uphold Lincoln's ideals, put troops in there to protect the people that wanted to change the whole situation in the South, to build industry.
Hmm.
But they were defeated by terrorism and by the abandonment of the black people by these Northeastern financiers who had been abolitionists before the war.
Hmm.
Lincoln understood this, that the way you're going to change the system, the slavery system, peacefully, is to build up a new industrial republic, to make the plantation system obsolete, and it has much less profit for people than investing in skilled industry. The problem was they were destroying the soil in the East, and they wanted to move west with their slaves to use up some other soil. Uh, that's what led to the Civil War. This is environmental degradation, but the answer to that is not stopping people from getting industry. The answer to that is the science of developing soil improvement and coupling agriculture with modern industry and having the interchange between the two of them. You got to bring modern times in, and that's the way you stop environmental degradation. So this is a completely different picture from
Hmm.
history than you get from people whose purpose is to depopulate the world. They're not
Now,
saving
Mr.
people.
Mr. Chaitkin, let's leave with a question. It's going to be a very difficult one, but I I like your vision. I subscribe to it. But how do we get the historiographic revolution executed by Mr. Chaitkin in his book here? How do we get that historiographic revolution into the schools of educations in America so that K through 12 people and university students, undergraduate and graduates, and all the professional schools, especially your lawyers in DC, get them to embrace the positive Renaissance humanistic tradition instead of what they've been growing up with for the last three generations of degradation, demoralization, and despiritualization. How do we affect that revolution in education? I like your historiographic and your political and humanistic approach. That's what's going to save America. That's what's going to save the world.
Why don't you get me some debates with people that have a different point of view on the campus?
Well, you know, as I know, that they try to pretend that Anton Chaitkin does not exist, right? They would never cite you, but I guarantee you, they have all your books in their little cubby holes, reading it and cribbing from it and plagiarizing it and watering it down. But
I'd like to hear from people who are watching this program. Uh, just write me info@antonchaitkin.com, and just let's have a discussion about this problem of a return to the civilization that built the United States, and understanding how we could back off of this suicidal confrontation that we're in right now, and get our uplift going again. Let's have a dialogue.
yeah, absolutely. And I think even the people who are ideologues instead of want to have a dialogue, right? The ideologues in education, I think they're beginning to realize now that their asses are on the line as well. It's no longer just a simple
That's true.
academic debate. It's
Yeah,
an existential question that we're yeah,
there's
that
a
we're facing right here. So please, right, Mr. Anton Chaikin, there are going to be people who are our enemies, ideological enemies, which I come to people with friendship, and pacifism. But please write Mr. Anton Chaikin and let's engage in a debate. We'll have a three-way, four-way conversation through StreamYard. I'm glad to use this platform for that purpose if you want.
Okay. Thanks a lot,
All
Professor.
right.
It's been a real
Thank you,
treat
Mr.
to talk to
Chaikin.
you.
Thank you, audience. Thank you so much. We'll see you soon.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.